I'm going to light this candle and place it into this cauldron to invite the beings of the story. This old story, recorded in Wales in medieval time, but it has components that are much older than this. I notice it's 20 to 8. I would like to give the story the space and the time that it needs. So please forgive me if we run over time. I hope Wix doesn't disconnect the call, because I'm trying this for the first time. Just some practicalities. And yeah, let's go in. I welcome you, beings of this story, from the Welsh mountains, from the Welsh lakes, from the Welsh rivers, to come and join us here in this circle, to bring us your inspiration, to bring us the awen. So if we were gathered in person, this is where I would ask you 3 times, do you want to hear a story? And if you were in person, I would hear you shout, yes! And I would be like, that's not quite enough. And you would shout again and again till we're ready. And then we enter the story. In a time before the first Roman soldier set foot on this island, in the mountains of Wales, at the shore of Lake Bala, there was a castle by the lake. And in that castle lived Lord Teggett and Lady Cerridwen. Lord Teggett was a man in his 50s, beard, broad chest, big arms. And he's not going to feature in this story, because all he likes is he goes out hunting with his friends and he just does his own thing. Cerridwen, red hair, bright blue eyes, broad shoulders, a woman like the moon, changing throughout the seasons, a powerful woman, to some a goddess, to some a witch, because she has those 2 sides to her. And her 2 sides, the bright and the dark, are reflected in her 2 children. And one night, Cerridwen and her husband, Lord Teggett, stand in the bedchamber, looking at their children, and the moonlight falls through the window on this full moon night and illuminates the face of a young girl. Cerridwen, the embodiment of beauty, curly blonde hair, fair skin, teeth like a row of pearls. But her physical beauty wasn't what made her truly beautiful. What made her truly beautiful was her heart. She was kind, she was caring. She was compassionate, she was creative, she was fun. Everyone and everything opened up around her, and she emanated light wherever she went. In the other bed lay the boy, the difficult teenager of the family. His name, Morfran, Sea Raven. The complete opposite of his sister, dark, ugly, misshapen, twisted. Ugly not just in his body, full of pimples and wonkiness, but ugly in his heart, ugly in his core, always mean, always critical, always sad when someone else was happy, envious, jealous, that kind of boy. And Lord Taggart was marveling at his daughter, but he could barely look at his ugly son. And Cerridwen could look at both of them, but she was worried. She thought, this boy is going to have a difficult life, and she knew he would not make many friends. And she looked at the moon, and it came to her that she wanted to offer him something. And she thought, if this boy is ugly in his body and his mind, at least he could become wise, he could become inspired, he could become a poet, a poem, a poet, a wise bard. And so she turned her attention to a place high up in the mountains of Snowdon, and she thought of it, Dinas Emrys, Dinas Aphraun Dundee, the fiery fort of higher powers, the druid citadel in the mountains, where the alchemists guard the sacred recipes of their tradition. And Cerridwen leaves in the middle of the night on her white horse, Seafoam, and she rides through the darkness. For 3 days she rides, till she gets to the mountains, the highest mountain in Wales, Mount Irwydfa, Snowdon. And nestled between the mountains at the foot of Snowdon, there's a valley with a lake, and in that valley is a little mound, and on that mound, which is actually left over from a volcano, said to be the strongest place in the country, a place of inspiration, prophecy, and magic to this very day. Cerridwen goes and she speaks to the druid alchemists. And she makes a request and she asks to gain access to the library, which in this place, the library is not a physical library, it's a multi-dimensional library. The towers of Dinas Emrys are towers of glass, of translucent light, inhabited by masterful beings and presences, exploring different times and realms within their own consciousness. And in this place, she's given the recipe for the Arwen, the recipe for inspiration. And this is not just a simple recipe that you could look up on Google with 500 grams of butter and 100 grams of mugwort or something. It's a recipe that contains hundreds of pages. And for each plant that is listed, there is a song, a ceremony, a protocol, a time of the day or the night, a time of the year where this plant or root or bark needs to be collected. And it takes her a while, but she transcribes the whole recipe of the Arwen. And with enormous gratitude, she finds her way back home. Back at Lake Bala, on a morning of the waxing moon, high in the sky, a little moon sickle in the sky, Lady Cerridwen stands. It's a summer night, approaching summer solstice, and she raises her hand to the lake. And 9 times she speaks these sacred words that you are going to hear in a minute. And 9 times she raises her arms, raising the water, and she feels the waters pulling on her womb as she says, and this is from the Order of Bardsovitz and Druids version of the story, which I like. Out of the womb, out of the boundless, to the world of time, out of the deep, I ask you to come, O vision of mine, O desire of mine, O yearning of mine. out of the womb, out of the boundless, to the world of time, out of the deep. I ask you to come, O vision of mine, O desire of mine, O yearning of mine. And each time she raises her arms and she bathes in that light and the energy that she invokes. And she knows she's going to have to get a new cauldron. It's part of the recipe. You don't brew the inspiration in an old vessel that you have somewhere lying around in your kitchen. She commissions the blacksmith Govanen to make a cauldron for her. And so she travels to see the blacksmith Govanen high up in the mountains, who works with the fire of the dragons, who forges magical weapons. He will be able to make the cauldron for Cerridwen. And Cerridwen says, Govanen, I want you to make a cauldron for me and to get it ready before the solstice. This is really important. I want you to bring it down to the lake Bala, to the old roundhouse, and place it in there. And you should be rewarded for your work. And Govanen, knowing Cerridwen's power, knowing what a mighty woman she is, puts the other work to the side. No more swords for Lord Taggart. He starts forging the cauldron, day and night, calling on the elemental forces of fire and water, hammering the metal till it is done. And him and his strong horse carry the cauldron down to Lake Bala, where the roundhouse is ready to receive it. And Cerridwen looks at her endless to-do list. For a year and a day, she's going to have to collect herbs, roots, parts of animal medicines, rare things that are hard to find, fern seeds and mandrake roots. And she knows she will need help. So as she rides her white horse through the forest on a summery morning, she comes to a crossroad and she looks over to the left and she sees an old man and a young boy walking hand in hand. They both look rough, as if they have not eaten much for days. And on closer inspection, she sees the boy is roughly 9 years old, a bit dirty, his clothes ripped by the brambles, but a bright boy, a friendly boy. And the man, blind, skinny, white-haired, walking with a staff. And the young boy, who is traveling far away from his parents, who has met this blind man, is guiding him through the forest. Or maybe it is the blind man guiding the young boy. And as she approaches and she introduces herself, they reveal their names. The boy is called Gwion Bach, which means the young innocent. And the man is called Morda, sea father. And she offers them food and shelter for a year and a day, in exchange for their services as keepers of the cauldrons and keepers of the flame. So Gwion and Morda agree, and they're brought to the roundhouse, where they have to apply themselves straight away to their task. The old man can't do much, but Gwion is taking on this job as a firekeeper. And for days and days, he's preparing wood, he's collecting kindling, he is breaking off dead branches from the oak trees and splitting them, cutting them with his axe. And this young boy is really applying himself. He's working hard to get everything ready. And on the day of the summer solstice, Cerridwen appears, and she looks at the piles of wood accumulating, and she asks Gwion to go and get water from the lake to fill up the cauldron. And for half the day, the young boy carries buckets back and forth till the cauldron reaches the right height, and Cerridwen ignites the fire with a prayer. And from that moment onwards, Gwion has to keep that flame alive and that fire going day and night. And Cerridwen goes off, and she goes and she collects all of the things that she needs for this magical brew. And young Gwion apprentices himself to the fire. He starts to feel in his body when the fire dies down. He wakes up at night, woken up from the changes of temperature, knowing when to add more firewood. What does the fire need? He is fully in service. And he's got burns on his hands, and he's covered in ash, and he hardly ever sleeps a whole night. But he's learning, he's growing, he's becoming stronger. He's getting to know the woodland on his adventures of going to collect the firewood. And when he isn't working, he's listening to Morda's stories. And Morda has spent 70 summers on this beautiful earth. And he has a few stories to tell. So Gwion is there by the cauldron of the goddess, in the darkness of the hut, with the embers of the fires, listening to story after story after story, taking it in. And every now and then Cerridwen comes back, and sometimes she turns up at this mad woman with her arms covered in mud, with like roots dangling in her hands, and she just comes in mumbling to herself, throwing something into the cauldron, and then she's off again with the sound of the owls in the background. And at other times, she comes in well composed, friendly, has a bit of conversation, sprinkles a few ingredients into the cauldron, and she disappears again. And she has made it very clear to Gwion Bach and Morda to never, ever taste a single drop of the cauldron. And they know that she means this. She means business. She is serious. And so they resist the temptation, and sometimes the cauldron smells good, and sometimes the cauldron smells bad, but they just focus on the fire and let Cerridwen do her thing. So a year later, the summer solstice comes back round, and the year and the day are nearly over. And Cerridwen, with her ugly son, who is also called Afakdu, utter darkness, come and they sit in the roundhouse. And Afakdu throws a few sticks at Gwion Bach and criticizes the whole place, and he sits in the corner and falls asleep. And his mother, Cerridwen, just placed the last herbs into the cauldron, maybe some henbane flowers, maybe some mugwort. And she knows that the brew will be ready with the first rays of the sun of the next day. So she sits down, closes her eyes, and contemplates the year and the day of work that she has done to get everything ready for this moment. And that's when Morda, the old blind man, takes a stick and he pokes Gwion from the side. And he says, "Add another log, my boy." Gwion takes another log, pushes it into the fire, and the flames rise, and in that moment the cauldron starts bubbling. The cauldron bubbles, and there's not just one, there's 3 drops flying out of the cauldron, and they land on Gwion's thumb on his right hand, and it burns him. It's hot, and out of pure instinct, Gwion licks his thumb, ingests the 3 drops, and instantaneously is filled with the bright knowledge of the Arwen. Simultaneously, the cauldron shrieks and cracks open in a big splits open, and the brew that is left in the cauldron, the brew of baleful knowledge, seeps through the crack and starts running out of the roundhouse into the lake, where it poisons the lake. And it's so poisonous, it's like some kind of Welsh Fukushima or something, where on the other side of the lake, the horses that eat the grass are dead in the next morning. And Gwion looks to Cerridwen, who slowly opens her eyes, and Gwion can see the red mist of her anger descending as her face distorts into this mean and ugly, angry woman. And because of his newly gained powers of Arwen, Gwion slows down his experience, and he can see what we would nowadays call that Cerridwen was going into a process. Cerridwen was triggered, and Gwion was triggered himself, and those are the most difficult situations. When both sides are triggered, conflict resolution becomes very difficult. And Gwion, in a way well ahead of his time, had a realization that his relationship to his mother caused an insecure, fearful, avoidant attachment style, and he could feel his legs getting shaky, his knees getting shaky, and he looked at the door and he legged it. He started running, and he ran out of the door, and Cerridwen stood up and ran behind him, and she was coming closer and closer with a hand to grab the young Gwion, the young boy, by the throat. And Gwion looked behind and didn't know what to do. He thought, if only I could run faster. And with this thought in his mind, the answer revealed itself in the form of a picture. He had the image of a hare. And as he visualized and received this image of the hare, his body started changing. He tripped over his feet, and as he was falling, he landed on 4 feet, and he was running as fast as he had never run in his whole life. His body was covered in fur. He had long ears. He had shapeshifted into the body of a hare, and he ran from the lake shore into the field, and he was running towards the forest. And Cerridwen, a shapeshifter herself, shapeshifted into a greyhound bitch. Shapeshifting and being equally strong, equally fast, she chased Gwion Bach. She chased him and chased him. And even though the hare was doing left, right, left, right, left, right, the dog was equally fast. Cerridwen was there with her teeth just about to bite into young Gwion's neck as she saw a stream, and he wanted to jump over it, but he could feel a dog behind him, and he was like, ah! And so another picture came into his mind, the picture of a salmon. And all of his fur disappeared. His body was now covered in scales as he slipped into the waters. And he did what salmons do best. He started swimming upstream and finding his passageways like in between the rocks and the plants of the riverbed. Cerridwen shapeshifted into an otter, and she took on pursuit of the salmon. Up the stream, coming closer and closer, following every twist and turn, till her teeth were almost there, like again, ready to bite into the flesh of the salmon, when Gwion leaped out of the water to escape Cerridwen, and up in the air received the image of a little wren, a tiny little bird, a tiny little wren, and he flapped his wings and took off, flying through the woods towards the hedgerow. Cerridwen, in pursuit, had transformed into a hawk, and she flew behind him, getting closer and closer again. And Gwion came out of the woods onto a farm, not knowing where to take refuge. He saw a pile of wheat, a pile of winnowed grains of wheat. And a picture arose in his being, and he trusted it. He transformed from a bird into a tiny seed, dropped through the air onto the pile, where he disappeared amongst thousands of grains that looked identical to him. Cerridwen landed, changed shape into the shape of a black, red-crested hen. Gwion observing from the ground, from the pile. Cerridwen leaning forward, the big eye of a chicken. Pecked the one grain that was Gwion Bach and swallowed him whole. Satisfied in her revenge, in her anger, she shapeshifted back into her human form, found her way home, sent the blind man off from the cottage. And she noticed a movement in her womb. She noticed something in her was taking root, something in her was quickening. And for 9 months, Gwion Bach was in Cerridwen's womb as she became pregnant and more round, like the cauldron itself, holding this young boy who was not Gwion Bach anymore, but who was also not yet who he was meant to be. And in moments of darkness, she thought, I am still gonna get you, and I'm gonna kill that child once it's born. I'm gonna kill this young boy. And eventually she gave birth, and she held the baby, and she could not hurt this beautiful, shining little being. She could not bring it over her heart to hurt this young boy. But she also did not want to raise him. So she rode on a horse to the ocean with a leather bag on a little coracle, which is an old boat, like a small boat. And she placed the bag on the boat, and like Moses in Egypt, she cast out the young child onto the ocean and released him from her life. And so he drifted in his all-knowing state of consciousness, connected to everything around him. He was listening to the songs of the whales. He was hearing the thunderstorms and the lightning. He was listening to the mermaids and the stories and the songs that they shared. For 9 months, he drifted on the ocean, during calm, gentle times, during storms and waves, drifting and drifting day and night. And so it happened that he came close to shore again, where the river Conwy meets the ocean. And this land belonged to Lord Garanhir. And Lord Garanhir was a mighty leader, and he had a son, Elfin. And his son, Elfin, had had nothing but bad luck throughout his whole life. He was in his 20s, and everything had gone wrong. Whatever he tried, he failed. Whatever he touched, it broke. And so, on the eve of Beltane, Lord Garanhir said to his son Elfin, I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you whatever you find in my salmon weir. A weir is a way of trapping the salmon. It's like a line of nets. So when the salmon comes, it gets caught in the net. And for year after year after year, Lord Garanhir had like hundreds of salmon, and he sold them and he made a lot of profit from them. So he said, this year, all this is going to go to my son Elfin. And Elfin took some of his father's riders and some of his friends, and on horseback, they went to the mouth of the river Conwy. And they stood there by the salmon weir, and they took out the nets, and they looked at them, and they were empty. And rumors were spreading that this man would never have good luck, good fortune in his life. When Elfin saw a little leather bag that had been caught in the salmon weir, and he asked one of his friends, he said, hey, get me that bag. And his friend jumps into the river, gets the bag, brings it over to Elfin, who takes a knife from his belt and carefully slices it open. And he sees the light emanating from inside, and he goes in with his hands and he takes out this young boy and holds him up. And he looks at the face of this radiant child. And he said, shining brow, Taliesin. And the child, still a baby, replied, Taliesin it shall be, and spoke in words of eloquence that Elfin was surprised and he was shocked, but he knew this was a turning point in his life. And this is how Gwienbach became Taliesin, shining brow, the light of the Arwen shining from his forehead. And Elfin took him home. And with each year Taliesin grew, his power grew tenfold. And Elfin and his wife looked after this child as if it was their own. And many more things happened, to the point where this very island that we are on now was named or known as Taliesin's Isle. And even the prophet Merlin, who is also connected to Dinas Emrys and the mountains of Wales, said, second am I only to Taliesin. So till this day, Taliesin is one of those ancestral beings. And now you have received his story. May it bring Arwen to you. May it bring Arwen to your life. So I'm going to blow out the candle. We're coming to the end of this session. I'm going to blow out this candle in gratitude for all of those beings, for Lord Teggit, Cerridwen, Craiwi, Morfran, Gwienbach, Morda, Gavanen, Elfin, and Lord Garanhir. For those powers of the land, we're sending you off in love and gratitude. Thank you.